Hey guys, and welcome back to another tier list video. To be completely honest with you, I'm making this one because they are quick to record, and I am currently in the process of moving house. I'm moving into my very own apartment for the very first time, so expect to see that coming in some future videos. But because of that, I just needed some quick content to put together so that you guys don't go without a video for a week. However, that being said, it does not mean that this is not an important topic, because today we're going to be discussing and ranking in tiers which muscle groups need the most volume. And just some precursors to this video, some things I want to put out there. One, this is purely based on my own experience as a coach, the experience that I've seen, what I've seen from my clients. It does not mean that this goes for every single person out there. If I say that a muscle has a very high volume tolerance, but your training absolutely shits the bed after you do 3 sets, there is always room for individuality. So don't take what I say as gospel. It is just based on my experience and my experience with my clients. That is one important thing to bear in mind. The other important thing to bear in mind is that I'm going to be counting volume as hard training sets. So for example, I'm not going to be I'm not talking about volume in terms of sets times reps times the weight. I'm talking about it as how many hard sets did you do for biceps? How many hard sets did you do for abs? And so on. So with all that in mind, let's get into ranking out the training volume requirements for each muscle group. We are going to be rating it between very high and very low, with everything in between. And the first muscle group is going to be triceps. And this is actually a really difficult one to start with because people tend to be quite varied when it comes to their tricep volume tolerance. I think it's definitely not on the very low, but it's definitely not very high. I would actually put triceps on that sort of middle ground. Some people can train it 3 times a week. Some can train it twice a week. It really depends what exercises you're using, because it can have such a large stretch component if we're talking about something like a skull crusher. However, if you're just doing cable push downs, then you can pretty much do them forever and not really see much. So in terms of volume tolerance, the amount of sets you need to grow your triceps, it's going to be right in that middle ground. But something different to that is what's next, which is biceps. And based on my personal experience, biceps have a very high volume tolerance. However, because I know what's coming, in comparison to them, it's not as high, so I'm going to put it in the high. What makes me say it's high is that the biceps are a difficult muscle group to create damage from. And you probably notice this in your own training. It's very difficult to get sore biceps for a lot of people because the muscle doesn't lend itself to being stretched under load very well. And as you probably know, stretch under load is what causes the most amount of muscle damage, and that's what gives you DOMs. That's why the triceps get super sore from something like skull crushers or overhead extensions, because they are in that stretched position. Whereas with a bicep, you've got incline curls, behind the back cable curls, stuff like that. But most exercises don't put it into that fully stretched position. It's also a very small muscle group relative to the rest of your body, which means it doesn't generate as much force. So the actual absolute load you're using is quite low. So it just doesn't really systemically fatigue you much at all. It's very fast recovering. Most people could easily train their biceps 4 times a week. And because of that, we have a high volume tolerance for the biceps. Going from biceps into something a little bit different, and that is the hamstrings. We've got beautiful hamstrings by Chris Bumstead in the picture here. And as you probably know, if you've done more than one leg day, hamstrings have a very low volume tolerance. This will be a spoiler for the rest of the video, but hamstrings have the lowest volume tolerance for any muscle group for anyone I've ever seen. If you are the rare individual that can do 20 sets a week for your hamstrings, one, I don't believe you. I think you're training like shit. But if you actually can do proper hamstring training for more than like 10 sets a week, then that is an anomaly. Most people, 6 sets of hamstrings a week, 8 max, is more than enough, provided you're doing your hip hinges. If you're just doing leg curls, then whatever, you can probably do them for days. But if you're doing heavy stiff leg deadlifts, your RDLs, your good mornings, with quality, control, intent, a good amount of load, with low reps in reserve. The hamstrings can't take a whole lot, and to grow your hamstrings, you're at much greater risk of doing too much than you are at doing not enough. Most people can grow from somewhere between 4 and 8 sets of hamstrings a week. You really don't need that much. Whereas if you compare that to biceps, for a lot of people, they're needing 16, 20, 24 sets of biceps a week to grow them. Again, might not be the same for you, but for most people I've seen, that's how it is. The next muscle group is forearms, and this is one that not a lot of people speak about, so I did want to include it today. And I just want to say now that most people don't need to train their forearms. If you are training your forearms, it better be for a very good reason. You better be a huge bodybuilder that's just trying to add on the little icing on top of the cake, or you better be, a rock climber who needs forearm strength. If you're just someone like me, or the average guy with a little bit of muscle who wants bigger forearms, don't do direct forearm training if you are restrained by any other factor, because it is extremely, extremely time consuming. Your forearms can take a shit ton of volume because think about it, they're always being used. They're tiny little muscle groups. The range of motion is tiny. The amount of load is tiny. It is really difficult to train your forearms adequately for them to grow, which you've probably noticed, because if you've ever spent some time doing forearm curls or something like that, you can just do more and more and more. Yes, the first time you ever do them, you'll be sore as shit the next day, but I guarantee you go back next week and you won't be sore anymore because you just adapt to that volume load so quickly. So for forearms, again, you can be training it 4 or 5 times a week easily. You can do 20, 25 sets, and that can be the minimum you need to grow. That can be your minimum effective volume. Seriously, if you've been training your forearms for a couple of months, the amount of volume you need to feel anything is absolutely huge. So forearms, so far, our highest volume tolerant muscle group. Next up is going to be abdominals, and we have Jared Feather in the background here. If you know who Jared is, I've met him in person. He is even bigger in person. But abs are another very high volume tolerant muscle group, and there are some, there are some things to mention here. If we're talking about things like ab rollouts or dragon flags, these are extremely, extremely loading in the lengthened position of the muscle. The stretch under load on those is huge, and if it's your first time doing them, you'll be sore as shit, and 1 or 2 sets will be more than enough. So in those situations, the abs have a very low volume tolerance. For you could be sore for 5-6 days. However, as soon as you are used to those movements, not used to them in a bad way, but just they're not brand new to you, or when you're doing things like cable crunches, machine crunches, V-ups, all fantastic movements. However, when you are reasonably well trained, you've been training for a couple of years, you can recover from them so quickly. You could easily do 4 or 5 sets of abs every single day and not experience much fatigue, any soreness, any any drop off in performance. Your abs can just be hammered over and over and over again. And just like the forearms, it makes sense. If you think about what the abs are used for, they are always stabilizing your body. Your forearms are always moving. They just have a super high volume tolerance. And all of those same reasons are why our next muscle group, calves, also have a very high volume tolerance. Like I always say, the first time you train them, it's going to be low. You're going to be sore as shit. But once you are reasonably well trained, your calves can just be hammered over and over and over again, because what do we do on our calves? We walk on them. They need to be recovered very quickly. Again, there are some people who won't need much volume for calves, but for most people, I think, from my experience, you're looking at 16 to 20 sets of calves a week just to get them growing after the first few months of training. And that is a lot of bloody damn calf raises. So I don't know about you, but I don't fancy that. Okay, the next muscle group, getting into some more popular ones, is going to be the chest. And believe it or not, the chest actually has a low volume requirement. And the reasons for this is that it's quite a strong muscle group. It's quite large. It can generate a lot of force. The amount of load you can use is quite high. And that just generates quite a lot of damage within the muscle. Not to mention, it opens itself up pun not intended, to stretch under load. You can do heavy bench press, which stretches the muscle. You can do flies of all different kinds, which stretches the muscle. Getting the chest into a full stretch is not that difficult, and because of that, it's quite easy to do muscle damage, and that means that you can't tolerate as much volume per week because your performance will drop off, you'll be sore, and all of these different kind of things. So what I will say about this is that most people are in danger of doing too much volume when it comes to training their chest, not too little. And I experienced this myself because growing up, I always wanted a bigger chest. That was definitely an area where I felt a bit insecure. So I just hammered my chest. I was doing 12 sets twice a week. That was way too much. When I was coaching with Steve Hall, he dropped me down to 10 sets a week. That was 6 on one day, 4 another, and I saw the best progress in my chest and my strength than I've ever seen. So most people are overdoing it on chest. The chest volume requirements to grow are lower than you think. Start around 8 sets a week and progress from there. However, on the other side of that, we have the back, literally on the other side of the chest. And this is going to join the biceps in high volume tolerance. And there's quite a few reasons why the back can tolerate a lot of volume. Even though it's a strong muscle group, there are so many muscles within the group of muscles making up your back. You've got your traps, which are huge, your lats, your rhomboids, all of that, and your erectors. It all adds up, and because of that, you need to do a lot of movement variety and a lot of sets within those movements. Whereas the chest can get by on 10 to 12 sets a week, your back, you're looking at 16 to 24 for a lot of people. You can train it 2 to 3 times a week. I've even known people to train it 4 times a week and see great results. And again, it doesn't open itself up to a massive stretch. The traps, actually, they do. However, your lats, for example, don't get massively fully stretched and lengthened in most movements, which means they don't get super sore. So for most people, quite a high volume tolerance. We have 3 muscle groups left. The next one is not muscle groups, 3 muscles left. And the next one is the rear delts. And I am going to put rear delts up here in very high. And this is a bit of a funny one because you can actually grow your rear delts by doing 0 rear delt work. Just training your back will grow your rear delts to a certain point. However, once you hit that point, getting it any higher than that point, it's like moving heaven and earth. Is that the saying? You have to do so much volume to grow your rear delts through past that original cap. It is crazy. And again, just like these other muscles, the reason for that is that it doesn't get very well stretched under load. It only generates a tiny amount of force because it's such a small muscle group and it's used all the time. You're always using your shoulders, so the rear delts can tolerate a ton of volume. And the same goes for your side delts. If you are somebody that's trying to grow those boulder shoulders, which let's be honest, it is all of us, you've probably encountered the fact that you can probably do lateral raises all day, every day until the day you die and never get sore. Lateral raises, side delts in general, can take so much volume, and to grow them, you are easily looking at 20 plus sets per week. They can just be hammered and still not grow for a lot of people. They are bastards of a muscle. That being said, what the limiting factor often is on your side delts is actually going to be your joints. Quite often, before you encounter recovery issues with your delts, it's going to be joint issues in your shoulders, in your bicep tendons, your elbows. Those are often going to give before any other muscle group does. Okay, our last muscle group for today. I keep saying muscle group. Our last muscle for today is the front delt. And this is a tricky one because the front delt is kind of like the side delt in the way that it can just be hammered and not really experience much. However, I'm actually going to put front delt by the chest in low volume tolerance. And that's weird because those two pictures have kind of come together. That's quite strange. And we've actually created a person here. You've got the hamstrings into the torso. That's really weird. Anyway, the front delts, although if you are directly training them with something like front raises, and military presses, they can take a shit ton of volume. You can do shoulder pressing and front raises until the day you die, and again, you will never really get sore. You won't get into too much fatigue. It's going to be other muscles that become a limiting factor, such as your triceps for overhead pressing. However, the reason I haven't put them in high along with back and biceps is because you can pretty much grow your front delts for the rest of eternity just by training your chest. It is very rare that I have people doing more than 6 sets of front delt work per week. And when I say front delt work, I mean shoulder pressing, because your chest pressing just puts so much stimulus onto the front delts that some people do 0 front delt work. If you are somebody with a busy schedule and you're only training 2 or 3 times a week, I think doing a shoulder press is a waste of time. I would just get you doing an incline chest press, and there you go, you're getting both in one go. So because of that, I've put front delts into low. So I think this is going to be quite a controversial list, and I'll be really interested to hear your guys' thoughts on where I've put these things. Obviously, my own experiences with my own body are going to heavily bias what I've said in here, and my experience with clients is just the icing on top of the cake for that. However, I would love to hear your thoughts, your personal experience, your anecdotes, whether you disagree, agree. Tell me how you would do things differently. And if I've missed any muscle groups you'd like more detail on, for example, the traps in particular, or the rhomboids in particular, or whatever it may be, let me know. But thank you as always for watching. I'm going to go continue moving house. Have a good week. Don't forget to subscribe. Give the video a thumbs up. Until the next one, see you later, guys.